Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Natalie Edmiston and I am the Vice Chair of the Gray Republican Committee. Tonight I will be introducing Joe Reagan. He's a WGAN guest host of Inside Maine and a morning news contributor and is here tonight representing our media partner WGAN. Mr. Reagan spent over 7 years as an active duty Army officer. His work spanned both operations and intelligence analysis, including 2 deployments to Afghanistan. He began his military career as a platoon leader in the 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 10th Mountain Division, where he led a scout sniper platoon in Afghanistan. During his 2nd deployment to Afghanistan, he served as the Deputy Intelligence Officer for the 3rd Brigade. Mr. Reagan concluded his military service as a watch officer at a national intelligence agency with the rank of captain. Mr. Reagan is a graduate of the U.S. Army Mountain Warfare School, Infantry Officer Basic Course, Airborne School, Ranger School, Military Intelligence Officer Captain's Career Course, and the Geospatial Intelligence Officers Course. He is the recipient of multiple military awards and decoration, including the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the Meritorious Service Medal, and the Combat Infantryman's Badge. A true Army household, he is married to the former Miss Tiffany Fagan, who was also a captain in the U.S. Army. They reside with their 2 sons in Portland, Maine. So without further ado, Joe Reagan.
Well, thank you, Natalie, and good evening, and thank you all for being here. There we go. And especially to all the sponsors that made this possible, including WGAN, who I'm here representing tonight. Of course, many of you are familiar with some of the work that I do on behalf of Easter Seals and our Veterans Program as well. First of all, if I can ask you to do me a favor, I want everyone to reach in your pocket, and I want you to pull out your cell phone, and I want you to hold it over your head. Can we do that? Peter and I were talking about this morning. He said, no matter how many times you tell someone to turn their phone off, they're not going to do it. So I'm going to wait, and I'm going to hold this phone over my head until all of you hold the phone over your head. And I'm going to ask you to put on silent, please. We're going to have a wonderful conversation this evening, and it's very important that we aren't disturbed by that. I'm doing it myself, and if you're like me, it's on vibrate, because it's okay, if you have to consider. Second favor, if I could please ask you to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I was going to ask if we sing. We should sing at Rotary. I don't have that in me tonight. Before I make a couple of introductory remarks, I just wanted to address a couple of key points. If you missed it on the way in, the Windham Town Council has some items for sale in the back, so please check those out. While you're shopping there, of course, there's also some light refreshments, and the restrooms are also back there. When you came in on your chairs, you probably found this survey. If you didn't find it, you're either sitting on it or it is sitting on the floor underneath you. Please fill this out. The council obviously is very interested in getting your opinions on various policy initiatives that they're pursuing. So please fill that out, and I'm sure there's a place you can drop at the end of the night. Also very important, tonight's discussion is going to end immediately at 8:30. I know this because my wife and I are celebrating our anniversary and my birthday this evening. So both those events are not happening tonight. We're just going to be celebrating this evening. It was a bit of a surprise. But I do have to be out the door at 8:30 because if you think socialist regimes are cruel, try standing up before a military intelligence officer. So to keep us on track, each speaker is going to have about 20 minutes of prepared remarks. After those remarks, we're going to open up for about 5 minutes of questions from folks, so you have an opportunity to engage directly with each speaker. At the end of all of our speakers, we'll then kind of pause and have a longer session for us to ask questions of all the speakers throughout the course of the evening. So that's kind of how we're going to approach the evening. And of course, afterwards, I'm sure folks will settle in and hang around for a little while, and I'll be speeding off to make sure that I don't upset my wife. I really appreciate all of you allowing me to show off my inner geek. As Natalie alluded to during the introductions, I've really spent the majority of my professional life studying economics and politics in one form or another. And I've come to embrace the fact that when you start talking about economics, about half the people in the room have no idea what you're talking about, and the other half pretty much fall asleep. My business and academic endeavors have brought me to China, India, South America, Europe, Afghanistan. And as a political observer, a commentator, and political scientist, I think one thing that really drives me mad is the outright abuse of the word socialism. The truth is, with economic models, I mean, these are fluid concepts. And according to a recent Gallup poll, Americans today are most likely to define socialism as connotating equality and social services, or a modified form of communism, or a conception of socialism being something that where just people get along with one another. About a quarter of Americans actually were not able to give an answer to that question, which I thought was fascinating. And that was true across both parties, even more fascinating. Simply stated, socialism is a political and economic theory that holds that the means of production and distribution in an economy should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole or by the central government. Its sentences like those are reasons why people despise political scientists. Because these concepts are complicated and they're fluid. They fall across a broad spectrum of beliefs and policies. Socialism and subsequently capitalism with Chinese characteristics. By the way, the Chinese switched these terms probably somewhere in the early 80s, but the underlying policies for the most part stayed the same. They use state-owned enterprises and central planning to drive growth, which most China watchers agree, and I've observed firsthand, that growth is probably overstated, which is far closer to the failed centrally planned policies and economics that we saw through the Soviet Union. Now, on the completely other end of that spectrum, you have a Nordic brand of, Northern Europe brand of socialism that puts an emphasis on free markets, individual liberty, and rule of law, while offering citizens a robust social safety net program. Key to making that function, though, is responsible policies that actually allow things to be affordable for everyone. The word socialism is far more complicated than just the taglines that politicians and commentators on both sides of the political continuum are attaching to proposed policies. As a child of the 80s, it is fascinating to see the change in public opinion that's occurred over the course of the past 30 years since the Berlin Wall came down. I remember meeting Gorbachev, and actually had the chance to meet him when I was in middle school, and listening to him talk about how the communist and socialist policies that they were implementing in the Soviet Union were just completely unsustainable. And yet today, we're seeing communist and socialist parties gaining ground. Not through violent revolutions, but through open elections. We're literally choosing to adopt policies and principles that 30 years ago we were united in defeating. And some of the battlegrounds remain the same: China, Cuba, Korea, Russia. Some were former bastions of capitalism, like Hong Kong, and the situation that's occurring there today. Going back to 1989, where a free and democratic Europe triumphed over the Soviet Union, pretty easy to forget sometimes that wave of freedom never actually reached China. In fact, it got far worse. And when I visited China a few years ago, it was blaringly obvious that the growth touted by party leaders was a complete farce. While on paper, China has the second largest economy in the world, and many people fear that fact, in practice, their planned economy has kept hundreds of millions of people in poverty. In 2016, the average wage in China was less than that of someone living in Iraq. Yeah, I'll let that sit in for a second, which is code for I lost my place where I was putting my mark. We've forgotten that the past 75 years, anti-communism was a bipartisan and unifying movement, but that this has long since faded given the politicized or the polarized nature of today's political climate. The modern political discourse has gone so far away from fact-based policy assessment that a whole lot of Americans have only the flimsiest gap of what socialism actually is. The Gallup poll that I mentioned earlier, it's not only do we lack a sound understanding of the technology or the terminology, we're not even using the same definition. So what it found was that Republicans are more likely to use socialism to describe government ownership. The Democrats use socialism to describe an expansion of government welfare programs, both of which are very important policy things to be discussing, but two very different things to be talking about. And that's why being here tonight is so important. How can we have a rational discussion about anything if we're not even using the same terminology? All of us have an opportunity tonight to be part of that solution. And I know that our first speaker tonight, Peter Falkenberg-Brown, who's also organized this evening's event, is going to go into a little bit further detail about that and how those terms are impacting our current political discourse. And so it is my privilege to start our evening off by introducing Peter Falkenberg-Brown. He moved from Portland to Gray in 2016 and became chairman of the Gray Republican Committee in January of 2019. He was raised in Portland on the West End. Peter rode off into the sunset on his bicycle when he was 18, got married, became a writer and a programmer, had 4 children in Virginia. Where in Virginia were you, Peter?
Richmond and Virginia Beach.
I think we talked about that, because I spent a good amount of time in Charlottesville. Learned how to say y'all. He's been back now for a number of years and is thrilled to once again sit on the rocky coasts of Maine and admire the ocean. He's the author of a book for teenagers called The True Love Thing to Do, an interactive workbook on finding love and preparing for an enduring marriage. That book is available on Amazon and on Peter's website. He's working on a new book called Do You Want to Be Free? Essays on Freedom as the Foundation of a World of Love and Beauty. And Peter hosts the Love, Freedom, and the World YouTube channel, which is focused on love, beauty, joy, and freedom in a mix of spirituality and freedom-centered culture and political issues. He writes frequently at his website, peterfalkenbergbrown.com, and that's Berg with an E. It's my pleasure to introduce Peter Falkenberg-Brown.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you all for coming. Before I give my brief remarks, I want to say some thank yous, because we have a lot of people participating in this program tonight. Is the mic too close to me?
You're perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Is Demi here yet?
No.
If she comes, we have a seat for her up here, if you want to point her this way. I think this is a really exciting event, and I'm so grateful to everyone who came. I think that one thing I wanted to mention is that a lot of us here tonight are very familiar with these topics, and therefore we might say, well, why are we here? Because we already know about all these topics. But one of the reasons that we wanted to do this event is because we can all use more tools, a tool set of information that we can then take out with us and use to speak to other people. And because, as you know, there's a lot of people in society that need to be convinced that socialism is not a good idea. So that's one reason why we're having this event. I want to thank our co-hosts of the Windham Republican Town Committee, Phyllis Hall, Gary Plummer, Doris Meehan, and their whole team. I want to thank our Gray Republican Committee members who've worked very hard on this. Thanks to WGAN as our media partner, and the general manager, Jeff Pierce, who agreed to have us appear on talk shows and a lot of promotional airtime. And we were on the Ken and Matt show, and with actually you and Matt. And I was on the John McDonald show twice, so that was really great of WGAN to do that. And thanks, Joe, for being our MC. Thank you to Lori Steele, the publisher of the Twin City Times, because she had a lovely little article about this event, and John Ballantyne wrote a column about it in the Forecaster newspapers, the Lakes Region Weekly. Jane Vaughn from the Lakes Region Weekly put a thing in it, and Demi, of course, and the Maine GOP is a co-sponsor. We have so many co-sponsors, and we're very honored that Demi will give a 5-minute talk right after Congressman Poliquin, a 5-minute report about, the state of Maine GOP. And we've got 4 county committees: Cumberland, York, Androscoggin, and Oxford, 33 towns, including Gray and Windham, 6 nonprofits, and 4 state representatives who are helping co-sponsor. So we ended up with 52 groups and leaders who have made this program possible, including, of course, Congressman Poliquin and Mr. Jose Mayoral, one of our speakers. And also thanks to Chief Kevin Schofield and the Windham Police Department for being responsive to our requests, and Dave Langway and the Windham's Veterans Center. So I'm just very, very pleased that this is a team effort. It's just been fantastic. So I'm going to move some of these papers out of the way. I'm going to give a slightly different slant. Elaine, hold up 5 fingers when I'm 5 minutes away from the 20-minute mark. I've been practicing, and I got down to 18 and a half minutes, so we'll see. But to start my talk, I'm going to borrow a phrase from the 16-year-old Swedish leftist, Greta Thunberg. You may have heard of her. Yes, you have. I believe that freedom-loving Americans, both conservatives and liberals, are at the edge of what she uses, the phrase, a mass extinction event. I'm not talking about her accusations about climate-caused extinction. Instead, I'm talking about the destruction of the political and economic freedoms that have blessed the populations of the world for hundreds of years. In spite of the recent tragedies of the mass murders of 150 million innocent victims by communist and socialist governments, and in spite of the utter economic destruction caused by socialist experiments in countries around the world, a 2019 poll conducted for the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation found that 70% of millennials are likely or extremely likely to vote for a socialist. Demi, we have a chair up here for you. In the front where you belong. 70% is a lot. With voters moving so far to the left, what can freedom-loving Americans do? How do we convince millennials that socialism would destroy America's economy and freedoms? Why would it? There are many ways to answer that question. My answer is this paragraph. Socialism would destroy America's economy and freedoms because it's a totalitarian system rooted in hatred, envy, and revenge that gives political and economic power to a bureaucratic elite who inevitably become corrupt as they steal from the masses whom they set out to liberate. As socialism removes economic and political freedoms, it crushes the human soul and turns its citizens into jailers and slaves. Personal dreams and ambitions fade away, and society descends into bored mediocrity, corruption, poverty, fear, and death. That's my paragraph. I think that socialism starts with a faulty premise and an incorrect compass heading. If we try to solve a problem with the wrong premise, it's very much like going on a journey with a map and a compass that's broken, that's 1 degree off. After a long journey, you think you'll be here, but you end up there. With socialism, the problem is that its view of the human condition is flawed. Socialists see the faults of society, but then they misdiagnose the cause, come up with a wrong solution, and end up going in a wrong direction. Their compass setting is off. They are correct that, yes, poverty, inequality, and selfishness exists, and good-hearted people around the whole world abhor those things. But socialists see rich people as evil haves, endlessly oppressing the have-nots, and their solution is to use the hammer of government to force people to be good, to redistribute their wealth, and forcibly modify politically incorrect thinking, speech, and action. The reality of the human condition is quite different. Rich people, capitalists, and so-called haves cannot be simplistically lumped into one gigantic evil category and discarded. Humans are all different and unique. The core problem, in my opinion, of the human condition is the invisible trait of selfishness that dwells in every human heart. Both capitalists and socialists can be intolerably selfish or not. Socialists don't recognize that human beings, rich and poor, have spiritually and morally grown over millennia. Civilizations have become more democratic and kinder toward those in need. Socialists also reject the view that moral change, love, and unselfishness cannot be forced by government. Their view about how to change the human being is perfectly summed up in a sign that was in a Soviet Gulag concentration camp. And the sign stated, "With an iron fist, we will lead humanity to happiness." It doesn't work that way. The answer to global poverty is to inspire unselfishness within the free environment of capitalism so that wealth and prosperity can be created for as many people as possible. I would describe this as unselfish capitalism.
We're all familiar with the dictionary definitions of socialism versus capitalism, as Joe referred to. Socialism means that the state owns the means of production, distribution, and exchange, whereas with capitalism, those things are owned by private individuals or corporations. I think that anyone who loves freedom and wants to own their own property, like their cell phones, should prefer capitalism. But let's look at how modern socialists view capitalism today. In the magazine Teen Vogue, which is about fashion supposedly, it said that capitalism takes the position that greed is good, while anti-capitalists view capitalism as an inhuman, anti-democratic, unsustainable, deeply exploitive system that must be dismantled. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez describes capitalism as, it means that we seek and prioritize profit and the accumulation of money above all else, and we seek it at any human and environmental cost. AOC then described democratic socialism as, it means putting democracy and society first instead of capital first. A lot of socialists will look at Denmark and say, well, that's the perfect socialist country. But that view of Denmark has been debunked by Denmark's Prime Minister, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, who stated, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy. Is capitalism so evil, based simply on greed and exploitation? University of Dayton history professor Larry Schweikart defines capitalism this way. It's an economic system in which individuals freely decide what they will produce and who they will serve. Since both parties have to consent, it's a system in which success demands that you serve the needs of others before you are rewarded for your work. That doesn't sound like exploitation to me. The jaundiced views of modern socialists come from Marxism. In the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx wrote, the bourgeoisie live in relationships of naked self-interest, of callous cash payment, and the icy waters of egotistical calculation. Marx condemned capitalism, writing that in one word for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions, it has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. He defined workers as slaves of the bourgeois class. He helped give birth also to the unrelenting hatred and scorn for conservatives that we see with social justice warriors who refuse to engage in civil debate. When he wrote in the Communist Manifesto, the charges against communism made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of serious examination. Marx birthed an ideology of hatred, translated into hardcore leftist strategy in the 1960s by the communist writer Saul Alinsky in his book, Rules for Radicals. He wrote, what follows is for those who want to change the world from what it is to what they believe it should be. The Prince was written by Machiavelli for the haves on how to hold power. Rules for Radicals is written for the have-nots on how to take it away. In this book, we are concerned with how to create mass organizations to seize power and give it to the people. But the power, of course, doesn't go to the people. It goes to privileged, leftist, elite dictators who look down on and dominate the proletariat. Communism and socialism are destructive to humans, and they are also anti-God, which is demonstrated by the left's hostility to Christians and religion in general. Saul Alinsky dedicated his book, Rules for Radicals, to the first radical known to man, who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer. The left's division of the world into a war between the oppressor haves and the oppressed and victimized have-nots has created a grievance culture of entitlement, resentment, complaint, and lack of personal responsibility. The oppressed get a free pass, which was clearly articulated by the founder of the Democratic Socialists of America, Michael Harrington, when he stated, people who are much too sensitive to demand of cripples that they run races ask of the poor that they get up and act just like everybody else in society. Well, There are poor people all over the world who are not leftists, who don't feel oppressed, who believe in hard work, and the Vietnamese boat people are a wonderful example. Socialism's grievance culture creates an immoral and hypocritical view of the private property and money that belongs to those who worked hard to obtain them. To a socialist, every capitalist is an exploiter, justified to take their money, their property, their freedoms, and even their lives. In his critique of socialism, the Daily Wire founder Ben Shapiro stated, "It is immoral to steal from people, even if you vote to steal from people. Socialism is immoral because it is theft." Steven Crowder said it well. Greed? What's more greedy than wanting to take from someone else something that you haven't earned? Wealthy socialists, what about them? They're hypocrites. I think that they should give money and property to the suffering workers of the world and live on the minimum wage. The 2020 Democratic candidates for president who are supporting socialism should all do that. Amen. But they won't. You know why? Because they're special. And they have a mission to lead the proletariat. In their socialist future, the new American socialist leaders will eat well as the people starve. They'll shop at private stores while the people can't buy bread. The socialist fish rots from the head, if there's fishermen in the room. So, who are the have-nots? Socialism works to indoctrinate so-called have-nots to have resentment and complaint. But dividing humans into two classes based on whether or not you have money is ridiculous, ignorant, destructive, dishonest, and immoral. AOC, as a bartender, was wealthier than millions of people in extreme poverty around the world. But she was probably, in her own mind, a have-not. How about now? She makes $174,000 as a wealthy congresswoman who constantly accuses capitalism of being selfish. The curious thing about humans is that you can be poor one year, rich the next, and then poor all over again. Our economic status may change, but the important factors in a human life is our spirit, our attitude, our value system, and our hard work. My third great-grandfather, Jonathan Brown, was a farmer in Clinton, Maine. He probably could have been described as a have-not, but I don't think he thought of himself that way. Instead, he had Bible studies in his home for 40 years and worked hard and didn't complain. His son, William, my second great-grandfather, worked his way up until he could go to Berlin, New Hampshire and purchase a company and then rebrand it as the Brown Paper Company, which at its height owned 4 million acres of timber from Maine to Florida. Was he selfish and evil, a capitalist have? His workers thought he was a wonderful and kind man. And then the Depression happened and the Brown Paper Company went belly up. My grandfather, Norman Brown, had married Helen Falkenberg, a Swedish baroness, but ended up living with her in a leaky mansion on Vaughan Street in Portland's West End. His have-ness was fading away, or leaking away. Their son, Carl, my father, was born as a have, watched the family money disappear, and then struggled with alcoholism and the holding down of jobs for the rest of his life. I was born as a poor cousin, a so-called have-not. I could have become a socialist with resentment, but because I was a pot-smoking, inhaling teenage hippie in the early 1970s, hanging out with leftists who had Angela Davis posters on their wall. But I did not become a leftist, and I gave up smoking pot. My father and mother taught me, get a job, work hard, and I did. And I also found God and adopted the view that human beings were sacred incarnations of a creator who had made them to be divine, loving, generous, kind, and yes, successful. And I've been working on that success my whole life. Am I a have or have not? I have far less money than AOC, but I have immense gratitude for many blessings, and I'm rich in spirit. AOC's attitude about human beings, the economy, and capitalists is just plain wrong. Many of the so-called haves helped billions of people. When Marx was alive, yes, there were nasty, unkind, and repressive factory owners. But civilization has advanced and people have grown. Forbes stated that the top 12 billionaire job creators, altogether worth more than $308 billion, have generated at least 2.3 million jobs globally. And I see the finger going up. but my introductory remarks didn't count. Those were thank yous. They were different. That's true. Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett started the Giving Pledge, and as of 2019 have signed on 204 billionaires to commit to give more than half of their wealth to charity. Halves are helping billions of people. It's clear that capitalism and free enterprise have blessed the world. Arthur Brooks, the former president of the American Enterprise Institute, cited a report that the percentage of people living in starvation-level poverty has fallen 80% since 1970. That's incredible. He said, if you really want to help the poor, stand up for capitalism. It was globalization, free trade, the boom in international entrepreneurship. In short, it was the free enterprise, American style, which is our gift to the world. One dreadful result of socialism is the death of truth. Vladimir Lenin said, we must be ready to employ trickery, deceit, law-breaking, withholding, and concealing truth. We can and must write in a language that inspires hate, revulsion, and scorn toward those who disagree with us. One of the left's most devastating lies has been their miseducation of our young people. The left has lied to them and continues to lie to them about the values of freedom and the history of the West. So much so that many young people today are victims of what I would call the Mowgli factor. Mowgli, of course, was the character created by Rudyard Kipling in all the Mowgli stories, the young boy who was raised by wolves and thought he was a wolf. The Mowgli factor demonstrates how easy it is to misinform innocent children. The left has been doing that for 60 years or more, to such a degree that now 70% will vote socialist. So then, how can we defeat socialism? The left has succeeded in indoctrinating a significant percentage of the populace, especially millennials. To counter that, we must speak out loudly and constantly about how destructive socialism will be for America. We must stand up, push back, speak out, write, rally, communicate, and educate both young and old to reject leftism, socialism, and Marxism. We must also reject totalitarian political correctness completely. And we must focus on elections and voters and educate elected officials and candidates for office to reject socialism, as Bruce has, and then inspire voters to vote for them, as we'll vote for him again. The Founding Fathers would be horrified by the current slate of leftist elected officials. I think they would say, we warned you. It's time to heed their warning, stand for freedom, and articulate the message that socialism would destroy America's economy and freedoms because it is a totalitarian system rooted in hatred, envy, and revenge that gives political and economic power to a bureaucratic elite who inevitably become corrupt as they steal from the masses whom they set out to liberate. As socialism removes economic and political freedoms, it crushes the human soul and turns its citizens into jailers and slaves. Personal dreams and ambitions fade away, and society descends into bored mediocrity, corruption, poverty, fear, and death. We cannot let that happen. Amen? Amen. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Greg Odlin from Cape Elizabeth. A lot of young people are confused on the difference between socialism and communism. Can you give a precise definition that would help clarify that?
Well, now you put me on the spot. I'm not a deep expert in this topic. I've read a lot of communist literature from the Revolution bookstore in Washington, D.C. My off-the-cuff layman's answer would be that communism is more totalitarian, but Joe or Bruce or Jose might be able to answer that question more. I think that, there's degrees of socialism, how much they take over, how much they own, the means of production, and how much political freedom they restrict. I think that perhaps it's just a matter of degree, but one of you guys could answer that perhaps.
So in general, it's socialism is considered a transition state of an economy, where if communism is this notion that we have complete public ownership, we're all sharing some. So you think of the communes that existed in the 60s and 70s. That sort of idealistic nature has never actually been achieved by any government. So the Soviet Union was striving for that, but they never actually got to that point. And so socialism is kind of that transition state that goes from free market to more of an ownership level where the government is taking ownership and distributing wealth until you get to a point where you have full collective ownership of everything.
And my impression is that when they say collective ownership owned by the people, what they really mean is owned by what the Russians call the nomenklatura, the elites. The people don't own anything. In the Soviet Union, they used to say, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us.
Hi, Rick Snow. A few years ago, probably about 2012, I was at an event at USM, and it was called Unemployment in Maine, Past, Present, and Future, which you would think would be relatively okay. One of the speakers was the head of the economics department at USM, and he talked about the old school Chicago business model, and then a little bit more about the Keynesian model, but then he went into Marxism and how wonderful it is. And the audience, mostly students at USM, sucked it up to the point where they were screaming that they need to march out down 88 and pull the people out of their homes and out of the Mercedes and do all these horrible things to the people who promote business. And I was shocked by that because my background, I was downsized and on unemployment, and I started a business in 2003, and by that time I had been successful and had 25 or 30 people working for me. And my point is, anyone in this country can do that. Anyone. There's nothing that restricts you from doing that. How do we get to that? How do we get what you're saying to the students, to the people that desperately need to hear the truth?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that all we can do is speak out and communicate as best we can. We've got an uphill battle with the media on the wrong side of the question. We've got an uphill battle with the university professors on the wrong side of the question. So, I mean, I've read some articles by some commentators who think that it's too late, that we'll just go for decades and decades or hundreds of years of darkness. And Michael Savage, I think, wrote an article about that where he just takes a very bleak view. I can't believe it's too late, at least whether it's the Alamo or not. We just have to go down fighting if we're going to go down, and hopefully we won't go down. I have heard that the people that are younger than millennials have different views. And so my hope is that the younger children can really wake up to the atrocities of communism and socialism. Of course, one of the biggest problems is the Mowgli factor. Young people don't know history. I mean, some people will say, well, you can't speak about it unless you're an expert. Well, you know what? Somebody whose parents were shot by Stalin doesn't need to be an expert. You can experience it, you can see it, you can open a history book, the right history book. So I just think we have to do our best to communicate and continue educating. Okay, one more question if there is.
I have one, and I don't want to go stand in front of the camera since I am a free American.
Can you give her the mic?
Choose.
We'll give you the mic then. Because we can hear you, but the recorder won't.
I know, and whether the recording hears me or not is unimportant to me. We need to go back further than the millennials, and I think one of the things we don't address is our public school systems at every level.
Yes.
I think the biggest problem we have in our country is that our young children in elementary school are being taught to be liberals. And if we don't get involved in our school boards, if we don't begin to call our principals and our superintendents about what's being taught in our schools, it's almost like a losing battle. And anyway, that's just my opinion. I think we really need to begin to do something with our schools and begin to organize our parents, all taxpayers, to go and to present what's being taught in the schools to the people in the towns, and to organize, to call, to do exactly what they are teaching our young people, to be the model for Saul Alinsky. We are now going to be the radicals to take back our public school system. Thank you.
Yay!
And a rebel.
Elaine's a rebel. Well, I agree with that. We should use the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals against them.
Yeah.
But we should, not hate them, because we wouldn't get Jesus' approval of that, right? So, well, I think I'm done, so thank you so much.
So I get to do this fun part where I have to try to transition what Peter said into what Jose is going to say, and a couple of things that stuck out, especially with the children component. And as a father of two young boys who are entering the school system, one of the things that we had to consider early on was the idea of doing, teaching at home and homeschooling the kids. And someone asked, why would you expose your children to all the crap that they're putting through the public school system? And I said, well, simply how can I not educate them to deal with it if they don't get exposed to it in the first place? But actually having those conversations with them at the end of the day around the dinner table to be able to come back and say, what did you learn at school today? And tell me why you think that way. And let's learn how to question these things in a manner that's respectful. That's where parents, you don't have to run for political office to do that. That's happening at the kitchen table, and it's parents and grandparents. We can all take a role in that. But to get back to the topic at hand, one of the things I thought was pretty funny that you mentioned was the sign. So when I was in Afghanistan, you always get trinkets when you're deployed. And I came across this old Russian sign in a base in Kyrgyzstan. And he was a local vendor, and it was a red sign. It looked kind of cool, and I was like, oh, this is fun. I said, what does it say? He goes, well, it's second place in a socialism competition. And I looked at him, and I said, that makes sense. And he goes, it does? And I said, well, yeah, there's no winners in socialism. See, you didn't think I was going to do comedy, did you? He didn't really have a response. He didn't think it was too funny. But then again, there was a language barrier. We won't go there. I'm really privileged. One of the things that wasn't mentioned in my bio is my wife and I, when we left the military, also went on to become business owners. And understanding that the notions and the challenges that face entrepreneurs, and some of those challenges that occur across generation. Peter mentioned that the transition of wealth across generations. And there's many American families that are 2 generations away from their rich relatives that are now gone. My own great-grandfather, who served in the First World War, he came home to run one of the largest boot manufacturers in all of the world. And then post-Second World War, the company went under, and of course, now I'm sitting here talking to all of us when I could be sitting in some mansion in Boston. And this is that's part of what makes America such a special place. But, to understand this challenge, to look at beyond our borders and to understand how this socialism works its way into these systems, I'm very privileged to be introducing, I'm going to do my best. Jose Angel Mayoral was born in Caracas, Venezuela in 1961. He attended in Colegio San Ignacio. He received a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Lehigh University in 1984. Jose worked in a number of family businesses in Venezuela, in Spain, including their GM, Jeep, and Honda motorcycle dealerships. His primary focus was on managing the family's food distribution, sugar confectionery, and chocolate companies. He came to America in 1998, but went back to Venezuela frequently to help his family and friends, and together with his family was a witness to socialism's destruction of Venezuela's economy, and his family's business that employed hundreds of people. His family's car dealership no longer sells cars and instead operates as a car repair shop. The food and candy companies are gone, victims of the Chavez price controls on food that favored imports over local production. In the year 2000, Jose started the Fiesta Candy Company in New Hampshire and later renamed it to Great Bay Chocolates. He lives in York, Maine, and is pleased, if you haven't tried them yet, to have brought with him for your enjoyment some samples of his company's chocolate. Oh, that was...
Thank you, comrade. Well, it is very sad that we have to be here talking about the dangers of an ideology that killed 100 million people not so long ago. Time is part of the problem. Some of us are old enough to remember the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain, the gulags. But now, all that evidence of a failed system is gone, forgotten and ignored by educators and the media. All that remains are the images of Che Guevara's on t-shirts worn by entitled and ignorant people. There is, however, a current example of socialism that we can use to illustrate the dangers of this disease, a tragedy that is happening this century now as we speak. And I'm talking about Venezuela. My name is Jose Mayoral, and I am from Venezuela. I was born in Caracas, the capital, and a city I miss. Let me tell you a little bit about Venezuela. It's a beautiful country in the northern part of South America. It has Caribbean beaches, Andes Mountains, tropical jungles, large plains. It's about the size of New England plus the mid-Atlantic states. The population is about 30 million. It's largely indigenous, but immigrants have come from Spain, Portugal, Italy, slaves that escaped from the British colonies, Palestinians, Greek, Hungarians, Chinese. My own grandparents migrated from Puerto Rico in the 30s. Religion is mostly Catholic, as you would expect from a former Spanish colony, but there are thriving Jewish and Muslim communities. There are no identity politics in Venezuela. We've never had time for that. Everyone's a minority there, and everybody needs each other to survive. But what brings Venezuela to the world stage is petroleum. Venezuela has the largest proven reserves of oil in the world, over 300 billion barrels. That's larger than Saudi Arabia and larger than Iraq and Iran combined. Around 1914, oil production began in Venezuela. This was the year of the Great War. Enormous deposits of very light oil were found in Cabimas and Lake Maracaibo, and soon Royal Dutch Shell and Standard Oil developed massive fields, pipelines, and refineries. By 1940, Venezuela was the third largest producer and the largest exporter of oil in the world. With oil exports came oil revenues in the form of salaries to employees and royalties to the state that fueled a large government that employed hundreds of thousands and financed enormous public works like the roads, bridges, electrical, you name it. They were the finest in Latin America. Along with the public sector came a strong private economy in the services, construction, commerce, and food, light industry. Demand for labor fueled enormous immigration from all these countries I mentioned before. In 1950, Venezuela had a larger GDP per capita than Canada. In 1958, dictator Marcos Pérez Jiménez was deposed and Venezuela became a republic. Well, sort of. There were two major parties, Social Democrats and Christian Democrats, and a minor party that just happened to be the Socialist Party. The two major parties agreed to share power in alternating elections. The Socialist parties were happy to get some representation in the Congress and a few mayors here and there. Let's not kid ourselves, it was a corrupt system. But there was a constitution, checks and balances, and a free press that uncovered scandals and kept graft to acceptable levels. In 1997, Venezuela still had the largest GDP per capita in Latin America, larger than Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, or Colombia. And life was good. My family ran a General Motors dealership that my grandfather started. He also started a pre-mixed cement company. My uncle had the Honda motorcycle distribution for the country. My father and uncle started a candy company and bought a chocolate company that happened to be the oldest business in the country. They also started a company that would distribute their goods and other foodstuffs to every single kiosk and bodega in Venezuela. And there was full employment, so much so that we actually had to go to Colombia to hire workers because there weren't enough. So up to the turn of the century, Venezuela had the strongest economy in Latin America, strong institutions, and no desire whatsoever for a socialist economy. As a matter of fact, the socialists never tallied more than low single digits in any election. We never worried about socialism. We used to say, don't worry, Venezuela is not Cuba. So you fast forward today, Venezuela has been ruled by Hugo Chavez and his successor Nicolás Maduro for 20 years in an increasingly socialist manner. And now, I'm going to give you some figures, but be aware that accurate numbers are hard to come by because most of them rely on government figures, and they're not reliable. What I'm trying to say is that the tragedy is underreported. Venezuela is now the poorest country in Latin America by far. No question about it. Unemployment is at 44%. Between 4 and 6 million people have been forced to leave Venezuela because of a lack of basic needs like food and medicine. Now, this would be like 50 million people had to leave the United States. First, the doctors and engineers moved out, then the tradespeople, clerks, factory workers, and anyone able to move. People have spent their last resources to reach the border with Colombia, who are our God-given neighbors, have opened their arms to welcome them. Colombians are remarkable people. Food production as a percentage of consumption went from 75% in 2008 to 30% today. Now, an estimated 40% of people rely on government-supplied food boxes as their main source of subsistence. Now, according to a study by the 3 universities in Caracas, Venezuelans have lost an average of 19 pounds in the past 3 years because of the lack of available food. It's called the Maduro diet. Medicine production has declined 80% from their highs. There's no insulin, hypertension medicine, antibiotics, antidepressants, or even analgesics. Venezuela today is the country with the most murders in the world. More than Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, El Salvador, you name it. 84 murders for 100,000 people. Compare that to 5 in the United States. Oil production has fallen from 2.4 million barrels a day to 700,000 barrels a day because of the lack of maintenance and investment. This year, the economy is expected to contract by 24%. Inflation, I mean, this is, the Weimar Republic is a joke compared to this. Inflation is over 10 million%. So the currency is worthless, and that makes trade and industry impossible. Water shortages are now common, so people are forced to get it from creeks like the Guaira River, which are essentially open sewers. There's a spike in intestinal diseases like amoebiasis and other dysenteries, as well as parasites like bilharzia and tapeworm. A lack of mosquito control has made diseases like dengue, malaria, Chagas, and Zika make a comeback throughout the country. According to Venezuelan government statistics, in 2008, there were 800,000 registered business entities in Venezuela. In 2018, there's 240,000. So imagine. Now, these statistics are just numbers. They don't adequately portray the extent of the tragedy that's taking place in Venezuela. When you lose the business that your grandfather, your father, and you built, it becomes personal. When your friends, acquaintances, or even family commit suicide, get shot, or sink into deep depression, it becomes personal. When you see people gathering food from trash heaps, when your former employees call you asking for help but you can't give it to them, it's personal. In our case, the government forced it to close. The candy company, chocolate company, and distribution company closed when the government forced price controls on all our goods and forced ridiculous salary increases on all our workers. We just couldn't hold it. There's no construction, so nobody needs pre-mixed cement. The GM dealership is still there, but they have no cars to sell because the government expropriated the GM assembly plant. They're trying to stay afloat by selling, making some repairs, but they're losing money. So I have often asked myself, what factors drove a sophisticated, wealthy society to allow this to happen? I think I've come up with some answers, but before you call the Nobel Committee, I have to tell you that they're obvious, if you know anything about history. The alarming thing is that while coming up with these answers, I found disturbing parallels to what's happening in the United States today. Don't worry, you may say, the U.S. is not Cuba or Venezuela. I've heard this phrase before. Socialism and communism are always trying to take over. It's in their manifesto. And don't let semantics fool you. They're the same thing. One leads to another. Socialism needs a charismatic leader to succeed. In the case of Venezuela, it was Hugo Chavez. Chavez, you may have heard of him, was an army lieutenant that led a coup against Carlos Andrés Pérez in 1992. 92 was a bad year for Venezuela because of the price of oil had gone down to $20 a barrel, and there was some economic hardship even though it proved to be temporary. The day of the coup, I remember planes flying overhead, firing rockets. There were tanks going around and soldiers, probably drunk, firing the rifles in the air. It was scary, but then my grandfather told me that it was the 5th uprising that he could remember and had me check to see if we have ice and beer for a few days. So I was happy then. So the coup failed, and Chavez managed to escape with his life to Ecuador. From there, he groomed his image on TV and print. as a corruption fighter. So he said he was going to be a corruption fighter. People from all walks of life adored him. Business people liked him because they thought he was a military man and he would restore order. Workers liked him because he promised to end corruption, and he was charming. He had me fooled. So the next idiot president, a man named Rafael Caldera, pardoned him, and Chavez ran for president in '98 and won by a landslide. We're lucky here in the United States this election. I don't think all the Democratic candidates put together have the charisma of a garden slug. So perhaps this election... Perhaps this election, we don't have to worry, but beware. So socialism needs a crisis, real or manufactured, preferably economic, to entice people to try a different system than they have. I don't see an economic crisis in the next year, but beware. In Venezuela, the crisis was caused by low oil prices, and Chavez took advantage of that. Socialism needs a struggle, an enemy, a cause, as an excuse to justify power grabs and bypassing the Constitution. I have a suspicion that this struggle has something to do with climate. In Venezuela, the case was, this struggle was Yankee imperialism, which was a hard sell because Venezuelans love U.S. Americans. They love their baseball, they love their TV shows, and there's no problem there. And socialism also will take control of large portions of the nation's economy because by controlling the payroll, they can control the votes. Chavez took over as many businesses as he could, including the petroleum company, all the utilities, and he expropriated half of the companies in the country. By controlling the payroll, he controlled the vote of the workers. In the U.S., you can see this happening in the Democratic Washington and with all the public sector unions. Democrats are buying votes with public money. And so it can be seen that the Democrats push to control healthcare, 17% of the economy. It's the same thing. They want to control the votes by employing them. In Venezuela, socialism will also try to infiltrate and dominate critical institutions like the electoral system and the judiciary. In Venezuela, Chavez broke the electoral system and placed their own people. The last two elections were won by socialists, had been suspect, since the only observers were from other socialist nations and Jimmy Carter. No, seriously. Likewise, Chavez purged the Supreme Court and placed his own. So when I hear calls for the abolition of the Electoral College and the packing of the Supreme Court, I know where it's coming from. And I could go on for a long time. Chavez tried to start raising class hatred, persecuted religion, confiscated all guns, took over the press by closing opposing outlets, all tactics used today by the left. I'm running out of time. So I would like to give you a small update on what has happened recently in Venezuela. The popularity of Maduro's Socialist Party is around 20%, according to Western polling outlets. In 2018, opposition parties gained control of the National Assembly, which is a single chamber Congress that we have over there. But in order to win his latest presidential election in 2018, Nicolás Maduro banned and jailed all his opposition leaders, notably Leopoldo López and María Corina Machado. Then the Venezuelan Constitution, which was approved during Chávez's mandate, states that if fair presidential elections are not held on a timely manner, the head of the National Assembly becomes president in charge, and he is tasked with organizing fair elections. The National Assembly determined that elections were fraudulent and designated Juan Guaidó as interim president. Since the National Assembly designation of Guaidó as president, over 50 nations have recognized him as legitimate president, including the US, UK, Japan, Argentina, Israel, Colombia, and Canada. I am very disappointed to say that the European Union has not yet recognized Guaidó. They have their own issues with socialism. The Trump administration has been very helpful to the Venezuelan people by providing recognition, embassies, and support to the interim government, as well as by placing sanctions on Venezuelan politicians. The Democratic Party has not been supportive of Guaidó. and the sanctions imposed by Trump. Several prominent Democrats, including Bernie Sanders, Ayanna Pressley, Ocasio-Cortez, Tulsi Gabbard, and Ilhan Omar, have publicly expressed their support for the Maduro government. Throughout the year, massive protests over the country have been brutally repressed by army and police and political police, with several hundred dead and over 1,400 political prisoners. Venezuelans throughout the world are hoping that one day soon the armed forces of Venezuela will stop repressing their own and return Venezuela to freedom and prosperity. On a positive note, just last week, the other socialist country in South America, and that would be Bolivia, expelled President Evo Morales after he rigged his own presidential elections. People took to the streets and attempted to storm the palace. Morales asked the army to intervene, but the army refused, and Morales had to flee to Mexico, a country that incidentally also has a socialist president. We hope and pray that our own Venezuelan armed forces follow their example, and fight for the Venezuelan people. And with that, I thank you for having me here, and I will attempt some answers. Yeah, I have a question.
You didn't mention the drug situation with the military.
I only had a few minutes. That's a very good question. The question was, if I may, the question was, I did not mention the drug situation with the military, and I just don't have enough time to go over things, but I'll go through it. One of the first things that Nicolás Maduro did was to try to buy the military. So immediately he purged all the officers that he knew weren't going to be supportive, and then he gave them not just drugs but several other ways of making money. During the time that Maduro came in, the FARC guerrilla was defeated in Colombia. So the drug dealers needed a different way to get drugs into the United States. And which better way than the Venezuelan government? So Maduro allowed his Guardia Nacional, one cartel is the Guardia Nacional and the other one was the army, to traffic drugs from Colombia to Venezuela through Nicaragua and Mexico. The DEA has, I'm guessing, 20 high-ranking Venezuelan officials in their list, in their eyes, as most wanted people. And the nephews of Maduro are in jail in Miami as for drug trafficking. So it is an incredible problem. But that's one of the ways that socialists will that in this particular case, the army is funding itself. That's why that failed the president of the assembly, because he couldn't get the military to move. That's right. And that's smart. The Soviets did it with Trotsky, and the first thing you want to do is you want to control the people that have the guns. Evo Morales didn't do it in Colombia, so he was kicked out. But you were right, sir.
One of the things that my husband and I both traveled a lot in business and went to Caracas in Venezuela, beautiful city. And one thing that we noticed then, it wasn't really that safe at its peak in the 90s. And our company would send people to meet us at the airport, and we'd never go into a private taxi. There'd always be a service to take us everywhere because it was not safe. And I can never forget the first time I came through the tunnel and you look at the barrios.
Yeah.
On both sides of the highway.
Shanty towns.
And the other practice that they had there is all the people were, this is at its peak, A, B, C, D, and E, and the percentage of the population, these are socioeconomic categories, and most of the population fell in the lower income. And there didn't seem to be a lot of opportunity, even though it was mostly a market economy. So I think from the beginning of it at its peak, it was not really embracing capitalism in the full extent of that word. I might be mistaken, but that's the impression I had.
I tend to disagree with that impression. That it is what happens with Caracas is in a valley, There's huge mountains on the side, and the area of Caracas is very small. That's where all industry is, that's where all the government is and everything else. So there really is no land to develop housing. So what the poorer people have done is they've been squatting on land on the hillsides. It looks pretty bad, but it is not as bad as Mexico City, or you find the same thing in Lima, find the same thing in Bogota. As I mentioned before, there was full employment. We couldn't find enough people to work. We had to go to Colombia. Colombians love to come to Venezuela because they got paid. The economy was a lot better.
Just to give you a little bit of my family visited Maracaibo for a wedding in 2004.
Was it hot?
It was hot. Thank God for the polar beer.
Polar beer, yeah.
They had some great inventions down there. You could get a pitcher of beer, and to keep it cold, they had an ice cold cylinder in the middle that kept it nice and cold. So the beer was great. But the thing that really struck me, this was in 2004.
Yep.
We were rapidly trying to exchange as many American dollars for bolívares, and now to think of millions of inflation today. But when we got there, there was about 40 of us that went there, and we bought all our tickets, our hotels, everything, and they were able to. 2 professors from University of Maracaibo, which very well educated. People, and I don't know about Caracas. We flew through Caracas too on our way to Los Rocos Islands.
Los Roques, you went to Los Roques?
Oh my God,
nice.
beautiful, paradise. And again, good beer out there too. But it just struck me. My nephew married a young girl from Maracaibo, and she was so well. They send their kids here to America also to go to the University of Dallas and whatnot. Very well educated people. And to just see, from 2004 to today, all of her family's now over here. The professors, their pensions are gone. Their properties have been seized. And it's just amazing how socialism in just a decade has just absolutely devastated and ruined an entire country with 30 million people, which compared to some of these other bigger countries like Mexico, with much bigger populations and hardly a fraction of the oil reserves, and they can't figure this out.
Well, Mexico's going the same way.
Yeah, but I just love Venezuela, and I feel so badly for people like you that have lost, your families that have lost what they've lost. But we're very happy to have you here in America.
So your nephew married a maracucha, they call them that way, and Maracaibo people have an incredible sense of humor. The problem with Maracaibo and the rest of the country is that the government has been keeping all the resources like electricity, water, and maintenance in keeping Caracas happy, believe it or not, because they know that insurrection can only happen in Caracas. It cannot happen in Maracaibo because the palace is in Caracas. So the rest of the country, including Maracaibo, have been left totally devoid of resources. So there's no electricity, there's no water. While in Caracas you may get water 8 hours a day or electricity 8 hours a day, in Maracaibo you just don't get it at all. And that's what's caused people from the countryside to have to emigrate.
Yeah, the other thing we saw was in Maracaibo you didn't have this military presence. When we flew from Maracaibo back through Caracas to go to Los Rocos, there was military everywhere with the machine guns.
There are several states in Venezuela that are right-wing. By right-wing, I mean somebody that would qualify as socialist here. But I mean, they're free enterprise, and that's the Andes region, and Maracaibo is the Zulia, very hardworking people, and they're very much in opposition to Chavez. So they have their own police.
The other thing that you notice is don't give up your guns. Because not many Venezuelans own their own rifles and handguns anymore.
I was on that trip with him, and he forgot to tell you we were about 10 feet away from Hugo Chavez.
Really?
As military men, and we were in our hotel. It was a very scary situation in 2004.
I hope you washed thoroughly.
Thank you, Jose. Again, it's always great to get those firsthand accounts of exactly what's happening across the world, because so many times until you see it with your own eyes or hear it from someone that sees it with their own eyes, you really don't truly understand what's happening on the ground. Our keynote speaker this evening, I have the privilege of introducing former Congressman Bruce Poliquin. Many of you know him. He served in Maine's 2nd Congressional District during the 2015 to 2018. He was the first Republican in nearly 20 years to serve in that district. He's widely respected for his hard work and passion in helping Maine families and small businesses. His work with President Trump and other House Republicans included helping to create the strongest economy that we've seen in 50 years. Prior to the U.S. House of Representatives, Mr. Poliquin served as the Maine State Treasurer, worked tirelessly with Governor LePage and the GOP legislative majority to put Maine's fiscal house in order. During his tenure, the Maine state government's debt clock was unwinding for the first time in memory. In the 2018 congressional race, Bruce won on Election Day, receiving 2,200 more votes than any of his 3 Liberal opponents. However, 9 chaotic days later, the only rank voting process for a federal office in the country awarded the seat to the 2nd place finisher, Jared Golden, the worst election scam in Maine history. Oh, he's a Marine. As the only serving child, Bruce decided not to run for elective office this cycle to help care for his aging parents in Maine. If I can say one thing before I finish and introduce Bruce, this, obviously we provide our own bios for me to read up here, and this does not do Bruce justice. One of the great things I enjoy about my job is the opportunity to interact with many of our political leaders and interact with them in a manner when the microphones are off and they don't have to be on. And I got to say, Bruce, that in the opportunities that we've had to sit down with each other when no one else was listening, it really does speak to your character as a person, and I appreciate all that you've done for the state and for the country. Bruce is a proud single father of his terrific son, Sam, having raised him since diapers after his wife tragically and suddenly died. It is my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker this evening, former Congressman Bruce Poliquin.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate that. Jose, you have a very compelling story, and we welcome you to Maine. Of course, you've been here for a period of time, but where in the hell are the chocolates? Didn't you all have the exact same question? Here he is. He owns a chocolate factory, and he's supposed to give out samples. Well, where are they? I want to thank Peter and everybody else for putting on this event. This is really important for all the reasons that we've already heard. This really, really is important. It wasn't long ago, maybe 10 years ago, that the word socialism was a dirty word. You never really heard it. That's not the case today. It is mainstream, liberal, Democrat ideology. And it's more than ideology. I'm listening to the words that are being used tonight, and what I always remember is raising Sam. I bring everything back to Sam, who is a terrific young adult. He's 29 now. I still treat him like he's 8 because you do that with your kids. But I can't, forget about the time I once took Sam aside and said, Sam, remember that time that you got in trouble and I took you in my office and we sat down and we had that talk? He said, can I use the car keys? They don't remember that, but what they do remember is what you do. They remember what you do. You live by example of someone else, and you create an example for your kids and your grandkids. So today what I want to do is talk about what socialism looks like to us here in Maine, in this country. I'm going to give you very specific examples, and I'm trying to stay away from labels because you don't have to when you show what these policies will do and are doing as compared to the words. But I must say the following. Before we get there, we all remember the history of this country, which is so rich. And Jose, I have a tremendous respect for your country, your former country. Now you're one of us, and thank you for that. But, you know, it wasn't more than, 245 years ago, Demi? We had this small group of colonies that stretched from New Hampshire down to South Carolina. Maine was part of New Hampshire. Who in the hell thought of that? Part of Massachusetts, rather. Who in the heck would want to be part of Massachusetts? But in any event, we were. And I'll tell you, these British colonies were so upset with the way they were being treated by royalty across the pond that the leaders of these 13 colonies got together in Philadelphia. And they did something absolutely unthinkable at the time. They got together and they said, we had enough, we're free. We're going to become independent, of the greatest, at the time, strongest military on earth. We are free. We're declaring our freedom. That was amazing at the time. It had never been done before. And they went beyond. They said, instead of having royalty, a king or a queen, or the military rule the government, we're going to create a government that's based on the consent of the governed. It's the people's representatives that will govern us. So for the first time in history, human history, they were putting together a government of the people, by the people, and for the people that Abe Lincoln said 80 years after. Now, after this declaration of their independence, they now had to fight for their freedom. 7 years, an incredibly bloody war against tremendous odds. And they won. And they immediately, with the early Congresses, started to put in place institutions that would support their freedom, like the rule of law, the separation of governmental powers, the civilian control of the military, and a free market, free enterprise economy. They knew that the best way to protect their freedom and their future was to build a government, build a society of we, the people. And that's the part that these radical liberals, not all, but many in Augusta and Washington don't accept or don't understand. Socialism, as I understand it, and as you see it, is elevating the state or government above the freedom of the individual. The individual freedoms that are the bedrock of our country, our founding. All of our institutions were put in place, the judiciary, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, to protect individuals the right to determine their own destiny. But socialism does away with all that. Instead, it says the government is more important than you. Now, if you look at world history, as Peter mentioned earlier, during the past 30 years, socialist policies around the globe have been disappearing, on average, in general, and they've been migrating more towards capitalist, free market, free enterprise ways of life and ways to run their country. And the reason for it is because, I think it was mentioned earlier, is that economies that don't focus on the individual and incentives to produce and be creative end up with lower standards of living, a shared mediocrity, fewer opportunities. I got to tell you this story. I'll never forget this as long as I live. I'm very close to Sammy for reasons that I'm very proud of. Tragically, but I'm very proud of the relationship I have with Sam. I call him, text him, or email every single day. He's just a great kid. He spent his junior year in college at the University of Madrid, a semester abroad. A lot of kids do. Now, I've always told Sam, I said, Sam, I don't care if you end up in Manila, Hong Kong, Madrid, doesn't matter. Dad's coming to see you, man. And it was Thanksgiving. He said, Dad, they don't do Thanksgiving in Madrid. I said, well, they should. So I got myself a plane ticket, put on my New Balance shoes, made in Maine. My jeans, hopped on a plane and went over to see Sam. during the Thanksgiving period in Madrid. I will never forget this as long as I live. He was introducing me to all of his buddies and this and that, and I was shocked to learn 80% of young adults, now this is 4 or 5 years ago, in Madrid live at home. Let me repeat that. The actual number is 80% of the young adults between 16 and 29 live at home. And the reason they live at home is because socialist economies, central economies that do not respect individual freedom and risk-taking and entrepreneurship result in stagnant economies, high unemployment, low wages, low opportunities. I cannot tell you how many of his friends buttonholed me and said, Mr. Poliquin, I'll do anything. Can you bring me back to the States? I'll work for you at home. Maybe you can get me a job. I'll go to school there. I didn't know what the immigration issues were at the time, but I was really stunned by that experience. Now, here's some good news, because we're listening to some of these speakers, and they're wonderful, but I'm a very positive Frenchman. I look at this class. This is half full. In fact, this is 2/3 full. Not really. Liberals usually win elections by disguising who they are, right? They pretend that they're conservative and moderates when they're really not. And they do that because we're right on the issues, and unfortunately, they're not. Or fortunately, they're not. However, this time is different because there's a presidential election going on. The media, who usually hides these Democrats, these liberals well, so they don't really tell you who they are, what they stand for, can no longer do it. In fact, I think there are 10 of them, Joe, on TV tonight, God help us, debating. Yes. So they're all going to try to out-give away this country to whoever's in the audience, right? So you and our young will see tremendous number of these opportunities that we can look and see for ourselves. They can no longer hide this, and Mr. Trump will make sure they do not. Now, let me give you a couple examples of why we should be incredibly concerned about losing our individual right to choose how to live our lives and turn it over to bureaucrats on the bet they can do better than we can to run our lives. If you look at recent polling, the number one issue on Americans' minds is health care. Now, how many times, and I'm 66 now, heck, I'm on Medicare. I'm on Social Security. They said I wanted to cut it. Go figure that one out. But how many times did Mom and Dad tell me, Bruce, the most important thing in your life is your health? I'm 16, I'm making chocolate, trying to drink beer, and get the car keys, right? Sure, yeah, Mom. They were right. You know it and I know it. They were absolutely right. Your health is the most important. So let's think about what the liberals are now proposing to us. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and AOC are taking the lead on this. They really run the party. And they think that bureaucrats can do a better job telling you what doctor you should have, what hospital you should go to, and what medical procedures you should have. I'll tell you, when Sammy was young, there is nothing I would not do to protect him, to keep him safe, to make sure he was healthy. Nothing I wouldn't do. Mom is 91, Dad's 88. I'm their guardians. There is nothing I wouldn't do to help my parents make sure they live out the rest of their lives in dignity and in good health. Now, here's what I mean by this. If you are in this audience, or you know others that are, one of 88,000 people in the state of Maine who are public school teachers working now or retired, like my father, or you're a state employee working now or retired, there are 88,000 of you. You have negotiated a specific health care plan that you like. If Elizabeth Warren gets her way and she wins the nomination, she probably will, and God forbid she becomes our commander-in-chief, and there's a majority in Congress, all those 88,000 people, their health care is canceled. I repeat that. Their health care is canceled and you are all pushed into a 100% government-run program called Medicare for All. If you are one of 6,000 workers at Bath Iron Works and you work for the union, you've negotiated a contract that's very important to you, it is canceled. And you are pushed into the Medicare program. Now, here's where the problem runs. Right now, there are 332,000 fellow Mainers who are in the Medicare program. I'm one, I'm guessing a bunch of you are out there too. 332,000 of us. Move over. There are 720,000 Mainers who get their health care at work. Canceled. I repeat that. There is no private insurance, and you are pushed into this behemoth government, 100% government-run program called Medicare for All. By the way, what does that look like in Canada? People, have you noticed a lot of these liberals say, well, they do it in Canada, why in the heck shouldn't we do it? Because we're not Canada. I came from Canada. We're Americans. Now, let's look at Canada, just for the heck of it. If you need a routine MRI, your wait list is 11 weeks, almost 3 months. To get a heart operation in Canada, 6 months. If you need a routine knee replacement, it's almost 10 months. And it's just as bad in the UK. My father and mom used to spend some time in Florida when they were a little bit younger, and one of Dad's best friends was from the UK. His wife was American, he was British. He came down with a form of cancer I can't remember and died waiting for surgery. This is real stuff. Now, to help pay for this, which is going to cost $52 trillion over 10 years. Let me say that again. I almost can't say that. Our national debt, which is horrible, is $23 trillion. This is going to cost $52 trillion over 10 years. To try to pay for that, your individual and small business taxes double. They double. And if you're a doctor, a nurse, or a hospital, and you were dependent on the government for payment, because everyone would be in a government program, right? They cut your reimbursements for the procedures that you perform by 40%. These are not my numbers. These are studies that are done. 40% cut in the payment of providers for services of the folks in this program. Now, when I was representing you in the 2nd District, I was a mother bear when it came to our rural hospitals. I would fight tooth and nail for them. These rural hospitals will go under if there are 40% cuts to their reimbursement rates. And by the way, in the UK, they have a huge shortage of doctors and nurses. Guess why? Well, of course. Sam, Dad, I want to become a doctor. Are you crazy? They don't want to live through this type of system. So that is real what they are proposing. This is not me. This is not pie in the sky. This is America. This is what they're proposing. And they're trying to do the same thing here in Maine. I like the Republican plan. I like the free market plan. Let's protect Social Security for me. Demi, you're 20 years off. For me. I'm just kidding. If the press is watching this, I'm just kidding. Protect Social Security for our seniors. Strengthen it. Make sure that we support private health insurance and do everything we can to enhance competition, to drive down price, and to improve choices. It's pretty simple. But remember, in a socialist state, they do away with competition. They do away with individual incentives because the state, the government, in this case, healthcare. They run your healthcare. There's no competition. They run your healthcare. It is very scary to give up your freedom to care for yourself or your family members. The number 2 issue that polls today in America is jobs in the economy. Now, I don't know about you folks, but we are now in the state of Maine at the lowest unemployment rate ever recorded. Let me repeat that. The lowest unemployment rate ever recorded in the state of Maine. We have more people working than ever recorded in the state of Maine. This is terrific. We have more jobs than we have workers willing to take those jobs. I just had a problem with a toilet at one of my properties. It cost me $300 to fix the toilet. Now, the toilet was in rough shape, don't get me wrong. But I mean, these folks are doing well. And if you don't like your job, you've got job security because you get another one down the road. I have a landscape, a little company that doesn't work at one of my properties. And I called him up. I said, Rick, I need you over there. And he said, Bruce, he said, we are so busy, we can't do it. I said, what do you mean you can't do it? I said, I can't use a chainsaw. He said, look, we'll get you next spring if we can hire 2 more workers. When that happens and there's a labor shortage and we're at full employment here in the state of Maine, effectively we are, wages go up. Wages are rising faster in the state of Maine than most other states in the country. And guess what? The wages are going up faster for those that work with their hands. Our blue-collar workers, their wages are going up faster than the supervisors, and they should. Now, the Obama economy that we just came out of a few years ago was characterized by what? High taxes, high regulations, trade deals that were really hurting American workers and Maine workers. And what did you get? Few opportunities, high unemployment, stagnant wages. Now, the economy that we have today did not happen by accident. It happened because we embrace choice. We embrace competition. And so we lowered taxes so you can keep more of your own. It's not, how many times have I said this, Peter, since I was state treasurer? It is not the government's money. It's yours.
Amen.
And I happen to think you know how to spend it a heck of a lot better than a bunch of bureaucrats in Augusta or in Washington. Here's the difference. The liberals in Augusta and in Washington treat it like it's their money, not yours. That's why they're trying to do away with your individual choice, how you pick health care. And what about tax rates? Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, AOC, they're saying we need 70, 80%, 90% tax rates. Now, I will tell you folks, I've run a bunch of businesses in my life, and I'm going to tell you flat out. If 80% of the last dollar I made goes to government, I ain't going to do it. Why should I take my savings, my hard earnings, or my partners, or borrow money from a bank and take the risk that if my business fails, I still owe the loan? Why should I do that if 80% goes to the government? The goal, and our goal as Republicans, is keep more of your own money, make sure taxes are lower, make sure businesses are doing well so they keep more of their earnings so they can invest it in new equipment and hire more people and pay them more. And oh, by the way, and I tell this to my liberal friends, if you work for the hospital or you work for a nonprofit or you work for the library, guess what you are dependent on? Tax revenues, right? Well, what generates tax revenues? People working, making more money, and businesses being successful. The difference is we trust the individual, we want them to take risk, we want them to start businesses, and we want them to create new jobs. I got to tell you another story. After Jane died, Sammy was 17 months old, and I stayed in touch with a lot of her friends at the time. They were in the museum business. God bless them. They were very liberal. Doesn't matter. Jane was coming along. She was almost there. But one of her great friends and her husband, Gwen, was from Massachusetts. She moved to the Netherlands, and she married a Dutch fella, and she worked over in a museum, I think still does, over in Amsterdam. So they visited one year. Sammy was 7, and their daughter, their only child, was 5. And we had them for a week. And so we did wonderful people. We just love them. I love kids and the whole thing. And the husband's name, who I won't say, because it wouldn't be appropriate. I said, now tell me, I know what Gwen does, but what do you do over there? He says, well, I do a little bit of painting, and I do a little bit of this, and I listened. I'm the host, I'm very polite, and I said, okay. I said, well, what's your career? And his wife spoke up and says, well, he doesn't work. I'm I'm saying to myself, I was 40 at the time, roughly. I said, this guy's my age, he's healthy, he's out there kayaking and he's got a wetsuit on, doesn't look too good, but neither did I. And I said to myself, well, Gwen, how's that possible? He says, well, in our country, you don't have to work if you don't want to, but the government still pays you. Really? Tax rates at the time was 72%. In the Netherlands, they're now 52%. Guess who is proposing a universal government paycheck if you choose not to work? The Liberal Democrats. That is socialism. How would I think about raising my son Sam, giving him all the benefits that I could, unconditional love, the best education for him, and a good, sound moral compass so he knows the difference between right and wrong. And all of a sudden, at 21 years of age, he graduates, says, Dad, I'm ready to go. I want to be on every government program I can find. And oh, by the way, they're going to pay me $1,000 a month to do nothing. Can you imagine giving up on a child like that? I don't want to ever give up on anybody. I want folks to work. There's dignity in all work. And it doesn't matter if you're painting metal roofs or digging sewer lines or cleaning toilets like I did to get going. There's dignity in every work, and you start at the bottom and you work your way up. It was Abraham Lincoln who said clearly, you do not help the poor by penalizing the successful. That is exactly what the folks in Augusta are trying to do when they did away with work requirements for welfare. That I just about croaked myself to get in the Farm Bill, and Governor LePage did with success here in Maine. They just unwound it. Now, let's talk about one more thing. Two more things, quickly. Do you know that today, America is more secure from a national security standpoint, and our economy is stronger, in great part is because we are now energy independent.
Amen.
Now think about that for a minute. Let's think about that for a minute. Is that we develop all the oil and natural gas and kerosene and propane and jet fuel and biomass and wind and solar. We generate as much as we need to run our lives, fuel our economy, and take care of our businesses. Wow, isn't that great? And guess what? We now have a president that says, you know, I don't think we want to send our kids in uniform over to the Middle East anymore because it's dangerous and they don't like us. And guess what? We don't need them for our energy. I love it. I love it. Well, the reason for that is because as free enterprise, free market Republicans, we believe in the development of all sources of energy. And let's increase production, drive down the price, and give people the option. You decide how to heat your home, how to drive to work. That's not what Augusta's trying to do to you. That's not what Washington is trying to do to you. In Washington, you have Mr. Trump to stop that. In Augusta, you do not. So let me tell you what it looks like. And this was not long ago, and I know Lester's here somewhere. This was not long ago. The Maine legislature had a real bill on the table being debated in committee, a $110 tax for every tank you fill up in the basement. Now, a tank of oil in the basement is 275 gallons. For those of you in the media who might not get this right. The tax was 40 cents on a gallon. Times 275 gallons is $110 every time you fill that up. So what Augusta is telling you is that we don't trust you in knowing how to heat your homes. 2/3 of Maine homes still use heating oil to some degree. Half of the homes use wood to some degree. All these carbon energies they want to get rid of. How about letting you make that decision instead of them? Because I'll tell you another real problem with this. If you go down the road not too far, Rick, you're going to go to one of our terrific paper mills over in Rumford. It was just recently bought by a Hong Kong company called ND Dragon. I met the owners. They are really interested in that mill, and they just bought the shuttered mill in Old Town, and they're opening up another 125 jobs up there. Guess what they burn in Rumford? Chipped up little tires. Chipped up tires. So instead of putting them in a landfill, they burn them. And it's so hot, the residue is almost non-existent. Guess what they burn up at Sappy Paper in Skowhegan? 850 jobs. Rumford has 650 jobs. And Old Town's going to have another 125 jobs. They burn natural gas. They're both carbon fuels. Good luck, Janet Mills. Good luck, Governor Mills. Why don't you call up Mr. Liu, who just invested a ton of money in the Rumford and Old Town plants, and say, oh, by the way, you can't burn tires anymore, and you can't use natural gas anymore. What do you think that family's going to do? Sure, they're going to leave. So, get ready for a carbon tax. The governor and the legislative leaders in Augusta, the liberals, they made it really clear they're having a climate council of sorts. They're going to, I mark my word, there's going to be a carbon tax of some form. I like our idea of free enterprise, competition, all forms of energy, you choose, but the socialist Democrats think that you can't make that decision, so they're going to make it for you. It would ruin our economy and really kill millions of jobs. I'm going to tell you another story. And it's my fourth point, my last point. I was at Dunkin' Donuts. I love Dunkin' Donuts. And I was standing in line with a lady, and she said, Mr. Poliquin. I said, Bruce, for God's sake, Bruce. She said, Bruce. She said, how are your parents? I said, they're fine, thank you very much. And she said, you know, it's driving me crazy. Folks are coming over the border. There have been 850,000, she knew the number, 850,000 this last year. They came in illegally, and they come in this country, they want everything free, and we give it to them. I said, well, not everybody does that, but I know what you mean. And then she looked over her shoulder, and she said, goodness, shh, someone might hear us. And you know, we both chuckled. We both chuckled. And then I said to myself, how sad. How many, I bet everybody in this room has had a similar experience. On Veterans Day, we celebrated Joe and all of our other veterans. See Jack Wibby back here. All of our other veterans, I know there are a bunch in this room, and I love you all for it. We celebrated you for standing up for our Constitution and our freedom. And you fought and you served to stand up for our First Amendment, our ability to speak freely and openly, practice religion or not, and assemble freely like this. And now the socialist Democrats are trying to shout us down. Don't be intimidated. I got to tell you a story. Is that 5? But it's connected to 4. University of Michigan's got a new, University of Michigan, Peter, has a new problem. The University of Michigan just lost a court case. They have something called the bias police at the University of Michigan. And a federal court said it is unconstitutional to have a group of individuals that will say, you know, son, or you, ma'am, you made someone else feel uncomfortable with your speech. As a result, we're going to discipline you. Are you kidding me? So now the University of Michigan is in the process of disbanding their bias police. Guess what? There are 200 other universities and colleges across America that have similar speech regulating bodies. That is the First Amendment. That is wrong, but that's what happens when you have individuals that don't trust your ability to speak your mind freely, to choose your health care, to take care of your family the way you want, to choose the type of oil or not, the way you heat your homes and drive to work, and they don't trust you that you should have more money than the government does, even though you earned it. That's the difference. Now, here's what I'd like to leave you with. What can we learn from tonight, in my opinion? Number 1, the liberal Democrats are dead serious about this. This is no longer pie in the sky stuff. They are implementing this as fast as they can in Augusta. It's all around you. I gave you a couple examples. So that means we must take it seriously also. Secondly, it was Jefferson who said, constant vigilance is the price of our liberties. As business people, and I am one and proud of it, It's so frustrating when you can't fix a problem and move on. You can't in discourse in a representative republic. It is constant vigilance of working hard, engaging people, win the debates, and go get them to the polls. And lastly, be a happy warrior. I'm a happy person. We should be happy. We live on the freest country that's ever given birth, humanity's ever given birth to. And most of us, I know Jose wasn't, but most of us were lucky enough to be born here. My son was born here. My parents were born here. My grandparents were, and then the generation before that swam the St. Croix River or something. Now, we are Americans, and we need to make sure we continue to stand up, be bold, and protect what is good and right about America. And it is not losing our freedoms to the government. When that happens, we really get in trouble. God bless you all. Everybody have a great Thanksgiving.
So as I mentioned at the beginning, to keep myself alive, I'm going to make one final introduction, and then we'll have a combined question and answer sessions. I know many people probably have questions for Congressman Poliquin. It's funny, Congressman, you talk about career choices, and I never saw myself, first of all, I never saw myself talking on the radio, and secondly, I never saw myself actually working for a nonprofit. And one of the things that attracted me to the organization I work for at Easter Seals is the fact that when we look at charity and what that means to the economy, it's not about just providing a handout. It's about making sure that what you're doing, and I think this applies both to the nonprofit sector as well as the government programs that exist out there, but designing those programs in such a way that you're providing someone with a true hand up so that we can get folks back into the workforce, and it's something that we work for every day. Again, before I get to the last introduction, I just want to take a moment to say thank you for all of you for having me this evening. It's been a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed being here. I apologize that I'm not going to be able to stay for all the question and answers and to socialize afterwards, but I'm sure we will meet again. It's a small state, and we see each other often. But I'm very honored right now to make the final introduction of the evening for Dr. Demi Kazunas. She was of Saco, who was reelected as the chair of the Maine Republican Party on January 12th, 2019. The chairman, she is a dentist, a small businesswoman with nearly 30 employees at locations in Scarborough and Skowhegan. Along with her practice, Dr. K, that's what my kids call you, helped start Bright Smiles, a dental clinic for low-income children in Portland, and is the co-founder of Dentists Who Care for Maine, which provides a free day of dental care each year. Dr. Kazunas is the past president of the Maine Dental Association, a nonprofit association of about 650 dentists across Maine. Born in Sanford, she received her doctorate in dentistry from Tufts before serving our country as a fellow veteran of the United States Army.
Too funny. For the record, I just want to say that my husband is looking at Medicare now, and I will be 64 in January, so I totally get what you're saying. And then the other thing I want to say is my parents came from Greece. It's not as bad as Venezuela, but it's pretty bad. And if you go to Greece, and I get to go to Greece sometimes and visit my relatives, I can tell you that most of them have dentures, because that's what a socialist government does for health care. It finds the cheapest way to take care of its population, and that's what we really have to be careful of. So anyways, I want to thank you all for inviting me. This is a great event. 51 groups here sponsored. That's amazing, and the crowd is gigantic. I am very honored to be here, and I think that it goes to show what's happening, and the dangers of socialism is really apparent to all of us. We're all fearful. I know I am. And it threatens the fundamental rights of all Americans. And I've seen it firsthand. I think anybody that's traveled has seen it. If we question the turbulent times that we live in, just spend a few painful moments, like I did driving here, listening to the potential power grab that's happening with a witch hunt. And that is a power grab. And this is what the socialist government is doing. or potential socialist government, I was saying, but the groups that are trying to get that approved. Before I continue, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more what the Maine GOP is doing, because really that's what I'm here. We've had some fantastic speakers. I've learned so much, and thank you. And so I just wanted to, just because we're running out of time, I would rather just get into what Maine GOP is doing and what's happening in the state. So we and the Maine GOP also are here to stop socialism by electing conservative leaders across the state. There are Democrats running for president, and there are folks here in the state of Maine that are also looking to embrace socialism, and they need to be stopped. It is going to take an army, and I say that strongly, an army of dedicated volunteers to push back these extremists, and I hope that you'll join me in the fight for 2020. I think we are doing well, and I feel very optimistic. And again, I have a tendency to be more like Bruce, to be quite optimistic. So please get involved. We need you all, and if you consider running, please do so. We need you. Here's an update on President Trump's campaign here in Maine. I've had the privilege to develop a relationship with our president, and I've met his advisors. And let me tell you, President Trump is fully committed to winning Maine. Amen. Okay? We are a targeted state. There are only 16 targeted states in the country, and Maine is one of them, and I'll tell you why. The reason that, and because of that, the Trump election team has decided it can turn the state red and would love at least 3 electoral college votes out of this state, and that's what it's looking to do. So why? Why are we a targeted state? Well, in 2016, when the president won and took one of our electoral college vote with only $40,000 spent in this Maine, unlike New Hampshire, he spent $20 million, we came within 2.7 percentage point of delivering the state to Maine, to Trump. There were 54,500 people that voted for Trump, but did not then come back out to vote in 2018 for Republicans. And he knows these numbers. Half of them are Republicans, but the other half are not. They're independent and Democrats. These 54,500 people are called disengagers. That's what the Trump election team is calling these folks. And they are vital to the 2020 election. And our president knows that. He is positive, our president is positive that if he comes to Maine, he will get these folks out to the polls, and he will ask them not only to vote for him, but to vote for all Republicans up and down the ticket. So expect to see our president coming to the state of Maine. Several months ago, our president also began building a team in Maine, and we are well on our way to growing the largest field program this state has ever seen. It's the largest. Trump and his team have already surpassed their lofty goals. They are training volunteers and registering voters everywhere. Our volunteers just a few weeks ago were able, in a matter of a few weeks, to get 2,000 signatures to get him on the petition in the state of Maine. And so President Trump is the first presidential candidate in this state to qualify for the ballot. And this is all by volunteers. And just to kind of let you know what's happening out there, my sister is a school bus driver in Biddeford. Okay, Biddeford is not a Republican bastion, right? I called her up and I said, I need your help. She got me 30 signatures for the petition and got 10 Democrats to re-register as Republicans in Biddo, if anybody knows Biddeford. Okay? And that's what's happening everywhere. And again, school bus driver in Biddeford. So that's what's happening. President Trump is not just only concerned about his race, he's also focusing on the Republicans in the state. And he wants victory up and down the ticket. With his help and his volunteers that and the people he pays in the state. We also were involved in municipal races, and we were involved with a Mayor Jason Levesque race in Auburn, which he just won re-election. And again, the door knocking was done by a lot of the Trump re-election team folks that are in the state. We're also working hard to re-elect Senator Collins and educate the voters that shady Sarah Gideon has an extreme agenda. And you're right, she wants to add a 40-cent gallon tax to our gas. She's also was involved with a taxpayer-funded abortion, dear Lord. And her out-of-control spend and tax policies is what she's pushing in Augusta. We have to get her out of here. She comes from Rhode Island, and I think she needs to go back there, if you ask me. Right? President Trump is committed to re-electing Senator Collins because he wants to keep the Republican majority in the Senate. Let's not forget that without Senator Collins, we would never get through the historic tax reform that she voted for, and also get Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. And I suspect we may have another one here in the next few years.
Yes.
Senator Collins has President Trump's full support, and we need to do the same. Okay, yes, so I wanted to make sure that you all know that, and I went to the Oval Office and spoke to the president personally. He wants the senator back. In addition to re-electing President Trump and Senator Collins, we're also fighting to unseat 2 congressional seats in this state. And we need to, let's be real, get Shelley Pingree and Jared Golden out. They are the rubber stamp Democrats who will always vote for Nancy Pelosi, AOC, and the squad if they tell them to do so. And Jared may have thought he was representing the state of Maine, but if you notice, he went along with what they told him to do. And that's the problem. And be involved with the farce impeachment process that's happening to us now. They're trying to silence us. So with that, I think we have an incredible group of candidates running in CD2. I urge you all to get to meet them, talk to them, and volunteer for their campaigns. I feel good about all 3 candidates. In CD1, we have Dr. Jay Allen. I was at a huge event last night with Honorable Bruce Poliquin, who did an amazing job for Dr. Jay Allen. It was a great fundraiser, and I think Dr. Allen's the real deal for CD1. With every passing day, we move closer to the 2020 election and the choice in the direction we take our country. We will stand up and fight for the principles of our founding fathers and not give away to the pressures of the left, extreme left, and embrace their socialist agenda. We need to make sure we fight back against AOC, Bernie, and Elizabeth Warren. I hope you will find tonight's discussions eye-opening and realize that we all need to fight together as a team, as one, if we're going to win in 2020. So please, all of us, let's join forces and let's work together as a team. Thank you.
With your permission, I'd like to get Congressman Poliquin back up here for his Q&A, because we want to hear from you.
Thank you. Jim Hoy, South Portland.
Yeah, Jim.
Just a point of interest, I've been working in Canada for the last 7 years in the oil and gas industry up there. And the province of Saskatchewan has a carbon tax. So what it's essentially done is strip the middle income of any disposable income.
Right.
So they get them at the point of sale. So it's all the utilities for the electricity, all the utilities for gas, and they get taxed on a square meter of housing footprint. So essentially that's what they do. So The end result is there's a groundswell protest about it. The other thing is they can't really tell what the government's doing with the money after they collect it. They can't point at it and say, that's what we're getting. So just a point of interest about the carbon tax.
I really appreciate, Jim, you mentioned that. One thing that everyone should be aware of is here in the state of Maine, 1/3 of our seniors, 1/3 of our seniors have only Social Security. That's all. No savings, no pension, 1/3 only Social Security, and the average Social Security check in Maine is $1,300 a month. So a regressive carbon tax on heating oil, gasoline, diesel, propane, kerosene, whatever it might be, hurts the elderly and the poor the most. Thank you for bringing it up, Jim. Yep.
Darwin Vale from Gray.
Daryl, is it?
Darwin.
Darwin. Beg your
All
pardon.
right.
Yes, sir.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
What is being done about ranked choice voting in Maine, if anything?
That's a great question. I needn't tell you folks is that we won on Election Day by 2,200 votes, right? It was the biggest ripoff in the world. I just testified in front of the Massachusetts legislature, written testimony in front of their committee of jurisdiction, and I got a call 4 days ago from a legislator in Alaska, and they're trying to roll it out in Alaska. This is really up to the Maine GOP, but I will tell you, Darwin, there is not a day that goes by that 1, 2, 3 people who I don't know come up to me and say, Bruce, I am so angry, not at you, you got ripped off. I am so angry that my vote didn't count.
Right.
What happened to 200 years, one person, one vote, the person that gets the most votes on Election Day wins? Remember, rank voting is not a Maine idea. This came to Maine by big money, out-of-state special interests, and in the end, put enough ad time when having to push it over the top. And when folks come back to you and say, well, the people of Maine want it. Wait a minute. When it was passed by 28% of registered voters voted, and only 15% voted for this. And the 2nd District of Maine rejected it twice. It is a complete scam. The biggest voter ripoff in Maine's history. Now, what can we do about it? I will tell you that we have a ton of people, an army of people, as Debbie mentioned, that would collect signatures to get this on the ballot and get rid of it. I took it through district court. I took it to the first appellate court in Boston. We were not going to get it to the Supreme Court.
When will they?
Demi? Yep.
As you know, it is now going to be law for the general election in 2020 for our president, right? And so, but the bill hasn't been enacted yet because what Janet doesn't want it to affect is a Democratic primary. So we need to wait till that happens, and then we believe that we will be getting some help. We just have to wait this out because we want to stay the bill for the November elections.
But isn't the presidential election spelled out in the Constitution, unlike the state election? That was the whole thing, right?
Well,
they can't do it for the president, right? It's illegal.
The other way, if I may.
Take it up.
The Maine state, it's a really good question. The Maine state constitution says that you can elect your state officials with a plurality, but it was silent on federal elections. That's why I was the first one in the country to have used it. So isn't that amazing? Is that you can't elect your governor and your state reps with ranked voting, but you can do it for federal elections. Susan Collins is under this right now. Here's the problem with this, and Demi, we talk about this all the time, and along with Jason Savage, is that it is no longer, because of this scam, the best people competing head-to-head. It's no longer that. So as a Democrat, what they're going to do is get someone whose only issue is animal rights. Their only issue is pro-choice. Their only issue is, silencing free speech and taking away your guns, right? And on our side, we should get someone who should run as an independent. That's the only issue is the Second Amendment and pro-life and so forth and so on. And then no campaigns. You don't have you're not going to win, and they know it. And that's what two of our competitors said. They're not going to win. But just make sure you vote for this candidate, the Democrat or the Republican, as your second choice. What a scam. It's now, how do you game the system? But that's what we have to live under this next cycle. Just want to let you know. So I hope our candidates are smart enough to make sure that they recognize that and deal with it accordingly.
They're not. Those seniors you were just talking about, they're not going to vote because they don't understand.
You know, it's, by the way, I agree with you completely. We did a poll when things settled down. You won't believe this one. Of the Republicans who did not vote, just as you said, the number one reason the Republicans did not vote, 26%, the number one reason is confusion of ranked voting. Yeah, it's a way to suppress voter turnout on our side. Yeah, it's horrible. It's absolutely. So we've got to deal with it, and we're really looking, I hate to put you on the spot, at the Republican Party here in Maine to get this organized, to get it on the only way we can do it now is get it on the ballot next year and deep six it. But that wouldn't happen until next November. That means we got to live with it for this next cycle.
And you need to educate the seniors.
That's everybody's responsibility. I agree with you. I do it all the time. I'm doing it now. I did it on Facebook. Go to my Facebook page. It has my 2-page testimony in front of the Massachusetts Legislative Committee. It's only 2 pages. Tells you everything you need to know and share it with everybody. Yes?
What about Matt Dunlap? Because he's the one who put the question, so it made it so confusing. I worked the Freeport polls that day, and I can't tell you how many people came up to the ballot machine and said, oh, I'm so glad the signs told me how to vote. And it was yes, when you really should have been voting the other way. But that's how we got it, because he makes the question so
Of course.
tricky.
Remember, these elections really matter, and Augusta is controlled by very liberal Democrats because they won the elections. If you go to their website and play that 5-minute cartoon that explains ranked voting, you're more confused after the cartoon than when you first looked at it. You know, I agree with you completely.
We have one
Yep.
question over here.
Yeah, I beg your pardon.
Right here.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Ted Siroy from Saco.
Hey, Ted.
Hi.
Siroy, you're a Frenchman like me.
Siroy, oui.
Yeah, we're probably related.
If you look at the spending for the last election, it shows obviously that the Democrats did not win it, they purchased the last election.
Yeah.
Is there any way we can stop this flood of money that comes from the Soros, the Bloombergs, the Sussmans from out of state, which is obviously, tipping the election to the Democrats' side?
I don't think so. I don't know, but I don't think so. But I will tell you this, and Governor LePage proved this, is we do not need, our candidates do not need all the money in the world to win, Ted. They need enough money to get their message out. I will tell you this, you talking to your neighbors and friends, watching the Patriots, I hope, or at Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter, or in line at Dunkin' Donuts, your conversation with that individual is worth more than any TV ad you can see, any mailer in the mailbox, or any radio ad. It is incumbent upon us, constant vigilance. We need to do the work, but I'll tell you a frightening thing, an absolutely terrifying thing that I bet a lot of you folks haven't heard of yet. There is something called Act Blue. This is a web of Democrat donors around the country that has an internet platform, and so Jared Golden can go and be one of the featured candidates on Act Blue, and money, small dollar donations that you do not have to report, to the Ethics Commission and so forth and so on, come in over the transom. We were outspent by $6 million. There was money that came in. He had no idea who it is. Act Blue. We are now trying to come up with an antidote to that. It's called Win Red. The president has the largest small donor database in the world. It's not Mr. Obama. It's not Mr. Sanders. It's Mr. Trump. And we've gotten that organized. We're starting to do that now, but we're way behind. Very scary.
Okay, one more.
Jack.
Bruce, you mentioned that the national debt is now at $23 trillion.
Horrible. Yes.
You did mention that the interest on the debt is now at $374 billion.
Yeah.
What happens if we fail, if the government fails to pay the interest on the debt?
You can't. You can't. It would be a financial calamity that we couldn't even describe. You can't. These are bonds, treasury bonds and bills that are sold around the world and here domestically to investors. And every 6 months, we have to pay interest on that. And when they mature in 5, 10 years, we have to pay the principal back. You must pay. If you don't, you're in trouble. Jack raises a very important point. And I would fight tooth and nail about this in Congress, and why the first bill I spoke about on the floor was a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Here's why. The interest, that interest that Jack mentioned, almost $400 billion a year right now, the Veterans Affairs budget is $190 billion. The interest on the debt is twice what we spend in a year to care for 7 million veterans who gave us our freedom. So it is becoming a budgetary issue. And Mr. Trump, you know, he's just not there yet. He's just not there yet. The House, the Republicans are there, absolutely there. In fact, if you look, and I don't want to get too much in the weed, Peter, but if you look at a pie chart, 70% of the spending at the federal government, your taxes go to Washington, not Augusta, Washington, 70% are spent on 3 programs: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt. They are all growing at arguably 5, 6, 7% a year, but our revenues are growing at 3%. It's getting worse, not better. The third of the budget that is discretionary that we have, that Congress has a say over, we've kept it pretty much flat for the last 8 years. But that's not the problem. But I'll tell you, you stand up and you say, we've got to fix these programs. The AARP comes after you and says, oh my gosh, Poliquin wants to end Medicare and Social Security. Completely false. Remember, we had this problem in Maine with the Maine State Retirement Center, and we fixed it. You haven't heard a hoot for 8 years because we fixed the problem. We can fix this problem, and you don't touch seniors, Jack. You don't touch folks that are on the program or close to it now. You talk to this fella here who's 17. You talk to my son, Sam, who's 29. You say, if we don't make adjustments, you ain't going to have the programs. We know how to do this. It's simple math, but you need to have the guts to do it. Thanks, man.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you all. Great speakers. Thank you so much. We're 15 minutes over. You've got a survey if you want to leave it here, if you filled it out, or mail it in. God bless you all. Thank you for coming. Have a great night. And don't forget to visit your Republican Town Committee meetings.